So the main principles of pruning grapevines especially is that we want to make sure our vines are balanced from the get-go. And what I mean by that is we look at the vine, or the pruner should look at the vine and see how well it grew from last season. And not worry about how much crop it had or didn't have, because that's relevant but not that relevant right now. What we really generally look for is well-placed spur positions, roughly a hand width wide. And the main thing is like right here was a cluster last year, there was a cluster right here, you got another cluster here, and there was a cluster here. So there's 4 pretty good sized clusters in this very close proximity. So if our spurs are closer together and our shoots are closer together, we have to spend more time maybe removing shoulders or removing clusters to get good uniform color and ripeness going on. And like here's a cluster, for whatever reason, didn't get picked. So you can see it's a fairly long. Now I add some berries to that, 150, 200 berries. It takes up some size, some volume. So again, we look at just how the vine had performed, and we're going to basically prune to that. So like here, for example, this shoot is not really very long, nor is it very thick. This is our normal, this is more typical normal cane right here. It pretty much stopped growing at 2.5 feet. And it's perfect. I mean, it got nipped right there, but it wasn't going to grow much more. So what I'm going to show you is that something like this, of this caliber, we'd want to do a 1-bud pruning, a basal plus 1. And same thing here, this will be basal plus 1, so it'll be very short. So therefore, we hopefully will have the energy in this vine this year to push 1 good shoot out of that position and not have to do extra suckering and extra manipulative canopy management. That's the goal. Now like here, I'm just going to go, when I prune this vine, I'm going to eliminate this position, because again, we're within a hand width. And this is, plus it's also coming out, and we don't physically need this on this particular cordon. So we look at how the vine performed, knowing what our ultimate goal is with Michael here at the winery as far as yields and quality. I mean, we're all about quality. If you're in another area of the California growing grapes, it's quantity. And yeah, I mean, everything would be pruned very erratic, and so be it. So we're all about quality here.
So that truly makes a difference by where you cut it, the angles and everything?
Yeah, and we don't worry about angles so much. They talk about that, but long as the pruner, when he's pruning, it's about 3/8 to a ½ inch above that last bud, because there's going to be some dry down. It's hard to believe that maybe this was a little bit longer, but again, we got a little bit of shrinkage for the year. So we want to be able to prune a little bit above that bud in case it dries down. If we prune too close, I'm not going to leave this, and it dries down, it could affect this bud, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. So we want to have the pruners prune about a 3/8 of an inch or so above that bud. Angle is not really a big thing, because if you have the guys cut on an angle, and that's a good question, then in the summertime while they're working in here, what are they doing? Tearing their shirts, tearing their arm, because that becomes a very sharp point. So if we can cut them more flat, then there's less chance of physical damage to the employees. And eye protection is obviously, because I see this cane really close to your eye protection out here pruning is, essential, because you never know when things are going to fly off or not. So anyway, back to the type of issue. If we knew it was going to rain this week, we might talk about doing some protection, but because it's fairly large, and they actually talk about dime size or nickel size, it's a pretty good target for these spores to land on. Because we haven't had rain yes, there was a little shower last week, but basically we haven't had rain in 6 weeks. The risk of spores being available to land on here are pretty nil. And the other thing is, not so much here, but we're starting to see some sap flow right now. So that sap flow is like cutting your finger, you got bleeding. So it's never going to create a surface for those to land and stay on, where they might just push off onto the ground. So there's the benefits of pruning late.
So are you worried about these vines coming alive with this warm weather?
If they're going to come alive, they're going to come alive whether we prune them or not prune them.
Right.
Okay. Now that's a good point that you brought, but the soil temperatures down at the root system, not right here on the surface, have to be 55 or 60 degrees consistently.
Okay.
If they're not, they're not going to really have much push at
Okay.
this point.
Because that's another question I get asked all
Yeah.
the time.
So it's just like when you read a package of seed, don't plant if the soil's less than 50 degrees, or plant your roses or whatever. I mean, it's all part of how warm the soil is for that to happen. We know, we call this a 1-year-old cane, first of all. So this growth right here is, even though it emerged from the bud over here last April, plus or minus, we still call this a 1-year-old cane. And we know that the most productive canes or shoots are going to come off a 2-year-old wood. So this spur that was retained a year ago is now considered 2 years old. So in the textbook and everywhere, we know that the most productive wood is 1-year-old canes off a 2-year-old wood. Cane prune vines, like they do in the Thompson seedless, which they have to cane prune, where they leave canes for fruit, they're going to look for 1-year-old canes off a 2-year-old. I teach FFA, Future Farmers of America. I teach kids right here at St. Leon High School every year how to prune grapevines. And it's the same thing. We don't have a lot of vineyards in Napa Valley that are cane pruned. There are some, but not like the Thompson seedless. Thompson seedless, why they have to be cane pruned is because the first 4 or 5 positions are fruitless. They're not sterile in a sense because they still have shoots, but they won't have fruit. So they have to take that variety as a variety and cane prune it in the Central Valley in order to have a crop. So, you know, we don't see too much cane prune vines here because, again, this is much more easy to teach a field worker or a student or yourself how to prune these vines than it is a cane prune vine, believe me. So again, what our purpose is, we want to take our spurs from last year, and if I'm going too fast, just stop me and ask questions. We want to try to cut down because we want to keep, the goal is to keep our spurs or our arms in this case all about the same height for uniformity. We don't want arms to climb too high through the canopy because otherwise then these wires become pointless. So we always try to remove our top position, if you will, and cut to our lower position, just like this. And again, we're going to 1 bud there. And the reason is because if we can do that, then we can maintain as much control over these vines. And these vines here are approximately 8 years old now. And you can see that these spurs or arms have not really grown too high in 8 years. And the further we go down into the Merlot, the older vines, it's the same thing. And why I'm not counting spurs, or the buds I should say, is because I know roughly 2 fingers is 2 buds. Our field workers pretty much know that. It's just kind of a rule of thumb. You don't have to sit here and count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You just, after a while, know how long to leave it. And again, what we're trying to do is leave, our goal is to leave 2 bud spurs wherever in about a hand width across. Okay?
So through pruning, you can control how many canes you're going to get?
Pretty much, unless there's some physical problem. I mean, you could pretty much control it. We wouldn't want to prune and leave everything this high, because then we know that all these are growing points and they'll have the potential to grow. And if we're going to have to spend more money, somebody's money, to sucker them all down, that's a waste of our time, okay? So therefore, if we just leave 1 good position that's 2 buds long, then we're in pretty good balance and harmony with what's going on with the vines. And at that, you know, albeit, it's still pretty productive out here.
So why aren't those other people that prune like almost immediately after harvest worried about the diseases and all that?
But they might be treating. But see, once they start the treatment program, then they have to do it every 2 weeks.
Why would they do that? Like, what are the benefits?
To my opinion, there's no benefit. We all know there's a labor shortage. Labor is not that short in the Napa Valley, quite honestly. I mean, yes, there might be a period of time in the spring when we're doing 15 different things at one time, mostly canopy management. But a good vineyard manager should be able to manage the labor and the work that's needed. So like I said, we look at our vineyards, we know how many man hours it took to prune this vineyard, or Dylan's next door, or Rule, and we know how many people we need. So let's just back it up, count in 5 rain days for the season, because I'd like to be done approximately March 15th, March 20th, and I'm fine with that. So it's easy to calculate what you need for manpower. To prune early, I really don't know what the benefit, unless they just had labor sitting around. Now, are you talking about pre-pruning like this, where they left everything long, or are you talking about final pruning?
Final.
And I don't know anybody that starts that right after harvest. The thing is, you wouldn't want to do it when you have leaf drop, complete leaf drop anyway, because all these leaves that are still here after harvest are manufacturing carbohydrates and sugars and things that go back into these vines. So if you prune too early, you're taking away some of that potential that's going back into these vines for the coming spring. Okay, a question about kicker canes. A little correction on that, Michael, and I really call those disposable canes. The neighboring vineyard over here, where we just finished pruning on Saturday, we left disposable canes. And why I use the word disposable cane is because we're going to dispose of them right after berry set. We're not trying to leave more crop over there, but we're trying to regulate the vigor in those vines on that piece of property. So by leaving 1 or 2 canes, then we'll tie them down to the drip wire. So in a week or so, you'll see them tied down to the drip wire, knowing that after bloom and when berries start to size, they will come back into the cordon and cut that off and just pull it out to the center. To me, that's more, and why that we do that is because those vines have a lot of vigor, a lot of capacity, and we're trying to slow them down so we can keep our inner nodes relatively short and our cycle going. Now, if we see that something happens and those vines cannot support that disposable cane into, let's say, middle of June, they'll come off early. If there's no water or something tragically is happening, or there's such a big crop we don't need them, we'll cut them off early enough. But generally, we don't want to leave them on much beyond berry sizing, which, again, just for sake of argument, is around June 15th or so. A lot of people do leave kicker canes in certain varieties or certain locations just because they want the extra crop. And that goes back to not maybe planning your vineyard or the vineyard out from the get-go with the proper rootstock, the proper spacing, the proper trellis, the whole gamut of things. So now they're fighting that issue of these vines are so vigorous, so we have to leave these little kicker canes. And what I call a kicker cane would be something like about here left in the canopy, and this being the spur here. Well, what happens when you want to take this out in June? You've got all this growth and all this fruit with all the competition right here, and the guy has to be really, really careful to pull that through without tearing away the canopy. So that would be what I would call a kicker cane versus a disposable cane that you're going to lop off and take away. And usually when we do our first suckering pass on that, because they are pretty close to the cordons, if you will, we'll eliminate the shoots right in that little part going down. Just kind of get them out of there so we don't have that direct competition right with shoot growth and leaves and trying to get mildew sprays in and all that good stuff. One of the things that, especially if you stood up on the little rock wall there where the table is, and you look, even before pruning, you look down through the trellis. One of the unique things about this trellis design is that we keep the centers open, and you can, like I said, get up there and take a look. And what that does is allow us to have the benefits of the morning sun coming in on this side of the canopy, and as the sun passes over in the day, it's still coming down inside, if you will, and then in the afternoon, but yet is not overexposed for sunburn. And so it gives us a better opportunity, even though these rows are not planted maybe with the sun pattern, but across it, that we can actually get our sunlight in again for the style of wines that are being made here. What we also want to do when we prune is we're looking for spurs or positions that are pretty much upright. We don't like to have them come out horizontal, and it makes it a lot easier to get this brush in the growing season through these wires. If we have things that come outwards, typically they might get broken, they're a little bit weaker in size, and just are not very strong. And like right here, for example, you can see where this one actually crossed over So it was blocking whatever was going on right here. I mean, this is going to come off anyway, but this is what we try not to, this is what we try to avoid, is something where it's crossing over. Same thing here, where when we try to put the brush up, I say try because it's not always 100%. We want more of the comb effect, if you will. You know, just get those canes upwards as much as possible so we don't have a lot of this kind of shadowing.
And that's controllable in the pruning process, or?
It's not 100% controllable, but it can be. But like I say, even when the shoots are growing, if the guy had taken and put this shoot upwards, maybe this might have been a little bit stronger because it wasn't shadowed per se. Same with this one right here.
You could have just trained it.
Yeah, but like I said, we try to get the foliage up into the wires as vertical as possible as well. That's why the positioning of the spurs from the get-go help out. And you can see like here, this spur, basically last year, this cane probably grew pretty much the same angle as this one is now. So that's why this cane continued to kind of go in that direction, whereas this will be optimum on the prune to anyway. So you want prune?
Yeah. All right, so you want me to do right here?
Yeah, no, right about here.
Right there.
Hey, just let it hang.
And then
Yeah,
you
yeah.
do
Well,
like a little
you can if
cut
you want. Yeah.
Okay. And then right here?
Yes.
God, what if I mess up the angle?
You're not gonna mess up the angle. We have faith. I know that's a little bit tougher wood. Plus it's high. There you go.
Hey. Okay, I'm done. I can't take any more responsibility because Michael will say I ruined the wine.
I doubt it.
Yes, he's mean.
How about if I turn around and go look?
So these guys here that are pruning, just for reference and numbers, they're doing approximately 50, 55 vines an hour, even out here. And you know, you start adding up all the cuts, and you know, it's just all this repetitive motion. It's a lot of cuts and what they're accomplishing, you know, each and every day. So they get some pretty stout muscles in them too. And like I say, and earlier we were talking about the architecture of the canes. And just for you guys to note too, and it's interesting, is that buds are always going to be opposite each other as they go up the chute through the growing season. The clusters are generally down at the base, very low on the base. So here was a cluster from last year, here was another cluster, and they're going to be opposite those buds. And then right here is our petiole with our leaf, petiole with a leaf, petiole with a leaf. But then the third position up is going to be blank. This is called either an unfruitful cluster, and another unfruitful cluster right here, and then another smooth area, so that's blank. These are either called unfruitful clusters or they're called tendrils, and that's what these are, tendrils that hang on to something. Kind of like you see places with Virginia creeper or some of these plants that grow up on rock walls or ivy. Almost the same thing, they have something to grasp onto. If we had no wires here, for the most part, these canes would be down. You know, because they cannot support themselves. Pinot Noir is like one of the worst. I mean, it's really a down grower versus Cabernet's can pretty much grow upright by itself. I mean, for a certain period of time until this gets pretty heavy. But so these tendrils, and that's what the guys have to pull off. So like here, these are tendrils from last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, just sitting here on the wires.
So what about when you see vines trained all different ways? Like this one's got, was that 4?
4 arms.
And then some have 1, and then some have 2. So what is the difference? What are people looking for?
It's, again, to me, it's putting the whole thing together to come up with what your desirability is for this particular vineyard, because we knew that it has very deep soils. It's very fertile soils for the most part. And yes, we can manipulate the water. We can add fertilizer. We can add gypsum like we did a year ago, and that's that white powdery stuff there. But if we had only done bilateral cordon, which would be the 2 cordons, then we would be fighting the issue like Dylan's place over here, where we have to leave the kicker canes because there's just not enough space to grow all these growing points. Whereas here, because we had decided to put in the quadrilateral system and separate the, you know, have an open canopy, if you will, and separate it, we're not leaving kicker canes, we're not leaving extra buds, we're not leaving anything, and we still have too much fruit. So to me, it's like building a house. If you start off too small and you have to keep adding to it because you didn't plan this or right or wrong, it's just a nightmare. Whereas if you start off right from the get-go, you should never have any problems with your vineyard. And that's, like I say, rootstock spacing. This is a 8 by 10 foot between stakes this way, and 8 feet between me and Ron. You know, we know that this root system, I mean, it's much like that vine that's on the wall over there, except for these are younger right here, but you know, eventually there's roots everywhere. I mean, they're going down 10, 12, 15 feet if there's no impermeable layer. And so they're pulling that water, the nutrients, and that's the reason we have the permanent cover crop here too. And I convinced Dylan to do the permanent cover crop because we need this cover crop in the springtime to help absorb that extra water, absorb the extra, if we have, let's just say it's the rain gods decide to start raining in March and April and May like they did in 2010, this grass is the best thing that's going out here because this is a big sponge pulling up that excess water.
And the mustard?
That's just, there's very little wild mustard here. It's mostly, well, like here, it's mostly grass culture. You know, pretty much all grass.
But the mustard, like, it just, you need different things for different soils.
Yeah, it's, sure. I mean, it's nice to have a mix. It's not like a lawn where you just want fescue or a rye. We have a mixture of stuff here. A lot of it, like we're standing, is more of a natural or a native. There's filiaries, there's villain, there's mustards, there's grasses, there's all kinds of things here, and it's all really good for the soil. Mm-hmm. Basically, an uncultivated soil is more productive than a soil that's cultivated because we're not disturbing it, creating a plow pan at 6 or 8 inches with it cultivation. We have these weed roots very deep.
So when you do see those vines that are completely down to the ground up valley, so they don't have any wiring. That's just the natural?
Well, there's probably still a lot up valley that are head prune, what they called head prune, where they cross cultivate. And they have no wires, so yes, they grow natural, but as soon as the canes get so long, then they trim them so they don't get that extra weight pulling them down and getting too much sunburn into them. So they try to balance the growth with all of that too, but there's probably no irrigation either.
Right.
So I always say low inputs, low outputs. In other words, they're not putting a lot into the vines, so therefore they're probably not getting a big crop. But that's what makes great old vine zin or something like that.
Yeah, so when you do see those head prunes, you can pretty much, it's like Zin, Carignan, those
Petit
traditional-
Syrah, some old Syrahs that we have up there, sure.
Yeah. So when you don't have them trained in this Y, and you do see the vines that are completely exposed to the sunlight all year long, how are they not getting burnt?
Different management techniques. I mean, they may have to put on more water. They may not leaf as much on the afternoon side, especially. I mean, the morning side you're not going to see much sunburn, but it's generally going to be in the afternoon side. And yeah, we would say the afternoon side because the sun pretty much goes this direction. So it's just a more management, and you're talking about the VSPs, the vertical shoot position vines, where they're very narrow, if you will. Okay. So they train everything upright, more of a mechanical. Yeah, they have to be more diligent with water, especially if there's a heat spell coming, not have overexposure, a lot more going on.
Yeah. So what about the weather changes so much over the last few years? Like, are they upset? Are the grapes upset because it's like a new environment?
They're adapting. Well, they're adapting for the most part. I think growers need to adapt quicker.
Right.
Again, I mean, last year, 2012, was just such a phenomenal, nice year to deal with compared to years past. We had nice weather, good mild weather. We had some warm days. We didn't have anything really cold and disturbing and wet, and you know, that's why we were able to mature the crops that we had out here or anywhere. Mm-hmm. If we had that kind of a crop load and then all of a sudden that cold, nasty weather coming in September, October, it would have been ugly, to say the least. Another point to that is planting the right varieties in the right soil in the right location. Okay, you don't see Cabernet here.
Right.
It's Merlot across the street, Merlot Chardonnay here, Merlot Chardonnay down there, and Chardonnay over there. You know, maybe Charles Krug has some Cabernet or whatever down the street, I don't know, and you know, Massa Ranch down there's got Syrah and things for that soil. So it's also part of that. If we tried to grow Cabernet and Canaris, for example, good luck to you.
Right.
I mean, there are some planted down there, but it's isolated places. You know, we see the Chardonnays, the Pinot Noirs, the Sauvignon Blancs, you know, whatever, Pinot Gris, I guess, whatever's down there, because again, you were trying to match the varietal with all of these other components, the rootstock, the stake, the trellis, irrigation, the soils.
So, so what makes Cabernet in Oakville and Rutherford, and why do they taste so completely different? That's just the soil? Because they're right next to each other, like
Yeah.
the sun has got to be the same.
It's pretty much all the same as far as that is concerned, but you're right. I think it's more about the soils, and if you were able to taste east side Cabernets versus west side Cabernets, it is really a complete different world. Well, of course, but you know, the east side Cabernets are getting a lot more sun longer in the daytime and a lot warmer temperatures over here on the eastern hills, whereas the western hills are not seeing as much. A winery that I used to work with had Cabernet on both extremes, and they would do these tastings, and it was like unbelievable.
So I wonder why they haven't delineated the east and the west yet.
You know, that when they first started talking about appellations, and I remember this, they first started talking about appellations and the Rutherford bench and all of this, then they wanted to do the east side Rutherford, the west side of Oakville, east side Oakville. I mean, they were trying to get down to 4 appellations within Oakville, Rutherford.
Yeah.
And, you know, as far as the appellations are, they're just definite boundaries. The Napa River, the highway, the street, or whatever it might be. Because there's a lot of vineyards on Inglewood Avenue or on West Zinfandel that are just over the quote-unquote Rutherford appellation, and those grapes don't grow any different than on the south side of Zinfandel, but because they made Zinfandel the boundary and not looked at the soil types.
Right.
And over here you got a lot more alluvial type soils that have washed off these hills because we get more rainfall over here over time. I'm not talking about last year or yesterday.
Like 100 million years.
Yeah. So you get a lot more different types of soils that come off of the western hills than you do off the eastern side.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. So do you think in the future we'll get even delineated even more the more we grow?
Well, politically that may happen. Will a consumer really care? I don't know.
Right.
I mean, it's you know, the consumers drive more markets than you can ever believe.
Yeah.
They drive the wine industry for the most part. I mean, there are certain people that may only want Rutherford cabs or Oakville cabs or Yountville Chardonnays. I mean, trying to sell Yountville Chardonnay to wineries, they say, no, if it's not coming out of Canaris, I don't want it.
Right.
It's like, it's still Chardonnay going, you know, you're not going to argue with them. And it's the same thing. It's in the tangerine market. It's in the table grape market. It's in the vegetable market. I mean, look at how we see these changes. I'm not going to the organic side. I'm just saying how you see so many changes of vegetables because people don't like this asparagus. They want green asparagus. They want fat. They want thin, whatever. So the consumers by far, in my opinion, drive what we do out here more so.
And most consumers would never know that it's the east or the west side or afternoon sun or morning sun.
And you take a winery such as BV or I was going to say Inglenook, but they're not really. Anyway, but you know, they're buying grapes from so many areas and they're putting it in the big tank and the big blend, so it's kind of a combination of all those areas. If it was Cabernet or Trappistry or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, I mean, I think for you guys, you know, with Michael, probably tasting the Chardonnay off of here, tasting the different, there's 3 clones of Chardonnay in those 10 rows. I don't know if he told you that. And there's a different clone over here, Chardonnay. Well, of course, that one's older. But then you take, because I know he's got the Dillon fruit here and he uses some of the Dillon. So, you know, there's probably a very distinct taste just within that.
Right.
Between the Chardonnays that are just a stone throw apart.
So I get this question all the time as well. So if you walk up to a vine, are you going to know whether it's Cabernet, Merlot, Syrah, Zinfandel?
At this time,
No.
In
When everything's in bloom, what are you, how is it?
Every variety has its own leaf pattern, or own leaf identifier, if you will. And a good ampliographer can tell varieties just by looking at the leaves and the architecture of the cluster and things like that.
Okay.
Even in the dormant season, there's enough if there was a varietal mix across this vineyard, and you would see different shades of tan, if you will, or different shades of this brown, tan, kind of red, like Zinfandel's got more of a little bit reddish color in it, believe it or not, or Cabernet's a little bit darker brown. But you can actually see different coloration in the wood based on the variety. I mean, I couldn't go out there and tell you, oh, this is Merlot because it's exactly this color. I have my little color scale with it, but for sure, leaves and that patterns, yes, you can definitely tell they're all different.
And so if you have 10 clones of Cabernet planted, are the leaves different between the clones?
I have not seen them being
like
different.
Cabernet is a Cabernet leaf.
Right. The clusters are where it's going to be different.
Okay.
Because some clusters may not have wings or shoulders, or like the clone 6 is very loose. Example of a very loose cluster that basically that's a winery cluster.
Yeah.
A winery. Yeah.
That tells you everything.
Yeah.
That cluster.
Exactly.
So every varietal has its own DNA, or every clone has its own DNA, and then what soil, the rootstock, how you train it will all affect the ultimate flavors.
Mm-hmm.
So you can never really, it's all going to be different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And location to location in Napa Valley, there's so many different soil types, just stone's throws away kind of soil types,
Yeah.
It's a little bit wetter, for example, in this vineyard, it's a little bit wetter soil over here by the ditch, by that Chardonnay over there, than it is even right here where we're standing. We're not into the appellations like France, where Bordeaux is Bordeaux and you grow only Bordeaux varieties in the Bordeaux area, or Rhone is Rhone and you can only grow the one of 13 or any of the 13 varieties of Rhone. I mean, we have the flexibility in our system to be able to grow what's best for the site no matter where we are, because our weather pattern changes too.
So do you think that we still have a lot more to learn?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Seriously, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're learning everything. Okay, shifting subjects here. Red blotch, have you heard of red blotch yet?
Yes.
Okay. It's somewhat relatively a new disease that's cropping its ugly head up. Unlike the other virus diseases that exist, such as fan leaf virus or grape leaf roll virus, this is also a virus, but those are RNA-driven viruses, where now red blotch they're saying is DNA. So we're way down into this chain of the origins of it. What we don't know is really what is the host, not the host, but what is moving it around, whether it's birds, insects, or why it's all of a sudden so prevalent in the Napa Valley. It seems like Napa Valley is always the target for European grapevine moth, for light apple, brown, whatever it is. It seems like Napa Valley is on the front page for the newest thing of the day. So red blotch obviously is the big concern. And it's a twofold, well, it's more than twofold, because it's in the nurseries where we buy our grapevines. It's in the mother blocks where the nurseries rely on the vine cuttings to come from to make the grafts or whatever they're going to do and plant them in the nurseries before the growers get them. And it's happening in 8, 10, 12, 15-year-old vineyards all at the same time. So, it's hard to conceive how did all of a sudden, I don't know, I can't honestly tell you if there's red blotch out here or not. I didn't see any, but why would this vine all of a sudden have red leaves that it didn't have 2 years ago? We don't know. Where did it come from? We didn't overstress it, by too much crop, you know what I'm trying to say? So, and that's really where these things crop up. We know that fan leaf virus is transmitted through propagation and or nematodes, especially Xiphonemia index as a nematode. The other multi-species of nematodes don't move fan leaf virus from one vine to another. Neither does pruning shears. Leaf roll, they're saying, is mealybugs, or maybe the ants now that move the mealybugs around in the soot. Leaf roll's been around forever, but I don't know if mealybugs have always been. So there's some things that we're learning. Going back to your question, have we learned everything we need to know yet? No. Every day we wake up, there's something new to think about. And the unfortunate part is, I think, because we know that there's going to be such a huge planting of new vineyards, whether it's today, next week, or next 3 or 4 years. Can growers really trust the nurseries and where they're getting their stuff from? That's the big question right now. And I know it was in the Napa Register about the shortage of grapevines for planting in Napa Valley. Well, to me, it's a little different, because we're not the only ones that are planting in the state of California. Monterey's planting, Fresno, every county in Napa, every county can plant grapevines. They're planting grapevines. But the problem is, I think why maybe that became an issue in the paper and the way it was worded, is the fact that we are more dependent upon different clones and different rootstock combinations. 3 different selections of Chardonnay right here. Yes, it's all in one rootstock, but you can imagine if you're trying to do a planting and you want to mix up the planting, and let's say we're doing all 5 acres and it's all going to be Chardonnay, you may not want it all in one clone or selection of Chardonnay, but 5 different ones. And maybe because there's a wet streak over here, we're going to have a different rootstock and we're going to do something different, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So that's where the shortage really is, plus higher density plantings. There's vineyards here in Napa Valley, are planted almost 2,400 vines per acre. This is only 700 and, no, actually this is only 540 vines per acre right here where we're standing.
So when you do that high density planting, is it just going to be a constant competition for grabbing things?
That's the goal, is that those roots are competing with each other. But you also got to remember, the crop per vine is less, the shoots per vine are less because you have a lot smaller space to grow them in. You still got as many, you still got to prune. Of course, they're much closer together, so it's different types of equipment and all those kinds of things. But yeah, there's more. That's the whole idea. You're creating more competition amongst vines.
And then you want the stress.
Stress. But we can also do stress here by not irrigating, by doing different things as well.
Okay.
Competition with the cover crops.
Gotcha.
Question. How long does the budwood cutting remain viable to be able to graft on?
This, I would suggest you go ahead and put it, if you were to use this, cut them as late as possible. And I'm doing this with some table grapes right now. Cut them as late as possible, roll them up in some wet newspaper, in a plastic bag, because the refrigerator will dry things out eventually. But if that's all you have is a refrigerator, just make sure there's moisture in there. And then the best time for grafting, and we have grafting videos on the website too, is probably about May. But if you have a refrigeration unit that's got a lot of moisture in it, it doesn't draw out like a refrigerator, then you can, but don't put it in the freezer. You don't want to freeze them.
Or let them go completely dry. Or let them go completely dry.
Yeah, don't let them go completely dry. If nothing else, put them in a bucket of water for a while, just like you would a Christmas tree, just to keep them going. I mean, if it was raining every day and it was 50 degrees or 40 degrees, they can last pretty good on the ground even. They're not longer, anything else, longer you go, time's expiring, but yeah. But a lot of times the nurseries, if they'll grab wood as quick as they can and get it in the cold storage in plastic bags, usually with sawdust. They won't use newspaper, but if you're only grabbing a few sticks or whatever, newspaper works fine, and they'll just keep them, boxes of sawdust or whatever, and always moist. And they got the thermometers in there so they can monitor temperature and all that.
So are you recycling a lot of these?
Well, what we're going to do is it gets recycled in the sense it gets on the vineyard floor, and then when it's time, we'll come in and chop them and mulch them up and just put them on top of our mulch that we already have here. No, we don't pull them out. We don't burn them. If some vineyards that we do, if we do pull the brush out, we won't burn them. We just chip them. I have a big chipper, and we'll just run everything through a chipper and create a mulch pile with that. So we're trying to minimize all that burning and all that stuff.